Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Please enter your questions for the presenters in the QA panel, and at the end of the presentation, we will get to your questions. This session will be recorded and available on our website shortly after the live event. Now, I'll pass it over to our presenters, Floyd Smith, Director of Content Marketing, and Faisal Memon, Product Marketer at NGINX.
Hello, and welcome to our webinar, NGINX Basics, Ask Me Anything. The two of us presenting today are Floyd Smith, myself, and I'm Director of Content Marketing. I was formerly with Apple as a technical writer and in some marketing roles as well. I was Group Channel Manager at AltaVista, if you remember the AltaVista search engine. And I was author of several best-selling technology books. And then Faisal Memon, my colleague, product marketer, was formerly Senior Technical Marketing Engineer at Riverbed, and was a technical marketing engineer and software engineer at Cisco Systems. So NGINX was founded by Igor Sysoyev, and a helpful quote from him. When I started NGINX, I focused on a very specific problem, how to handle more customers on a single server. And that's led to NGINX Open Source and NGINX Plus, which are on 54% of the top 100,000 most visited websites. And that percentage moves up a point every couple of months, which means that people with the world's busiest websites are steadily adding NGINX to their stack. And why would they do that? The reason is that NGINX has a ton of advantages in terms of making sites more resilient, more manageable, faster, and more reliable. The NGINX open source project started in the early 2000s, and it grew so fast it was taking up all the time of everyone involved with it. So a company was started to make NGINX a going concern that could continue to support the open source project. Founded in 2011, and NGINX Plus was first released in 2013. Now, the company is based here in the US. The original development team was and continues to be in Moscow. But now we have officers with developers in most of them, in San Francisco, London, Cork, Moscow, and a few other cities as well. We have more than 1,200 commercial customers for NGINX Plus, which includes support as well as additional features, and more than 170 employees. And now I'm going to describe the NGINX application platform. The initial offering, NGINX Open Source, has grown up, and so now the NGINX application platform includes a set of products. First of all, NGINX Plus serves as a load balancer, content cache, as a web server, and has a WAF available for it. So NGINX Plus does application delivery, and as you can see from the uptake of NGINX Plus and NGINX Open Source, does it very well. NGINX Unit is a new offering, an application server. And it can run either a monolithic application, microservices, or if you're in a transition. NGINX Unit is still in beta, so it's not ready for production use, but people are having a really good time experimenting with it, and it's available for download on GitHub. Then we have announced and shown NGINX Controller, and NGINX Controller actually includes much of the functionality of NGINX Amplify, which you can go on to our site and download right now and start trying. And there's a paid version of Amplify for additional, for enough servers, 5 or more servers. Controller gives you the monitoring features from Amplify, plus lets you basically reach through the pane of glass with your mouse and do stuff. And there's a demo on our site in video. There's a demo on our YouTube channel. There's an expanded version of the demo with a transcription on our site as a blog post. So you can learn a ton about NGINX Controller. Also on our site is a description and more detail of the NGINX application platform. And all of this works across the cloud, virtual machines, containers, on bare metal. So it's very flexible. You can set up your app to run in NGINX and then have really, really good portability across different infrastructures, giving you a lot of control in terms of choosing your cost structure, from how you're provisioning the delivery of your services, and the ability to scale across different services very flexibly and easily. So just to read the description, NGINX provides a suite of technologies designed to help you develop and deliver digital experiences spanning from legacy, monolithic apps to modern microservices apps, and I would add everything in between. And now I'm going to hand over to Faisal to start talking about the basics of NGINX and NGINX Plus.
Hey, thanks, Floyd. And I just got 2 slides before we jump into your questions that just kind of talk about some of the best practices. And one is installation. And with NGINX, as is the case with most mature open source projects, there's multiple ways you can install it. You can install it from our official repo. You can install it from the repo provided by your OS vendor, Debian or Ubuntu, or whatever it is that you're using. You can, of course, compile it from source as well. So you have multiple different options. And what we typically recommend is people use our official repo. And within our official repo, we have 2 branches. We have the mainline branch, which is actively developed, and that's where we make new feature enhancements. And we release roughly every 4 to 6 weeks a new version of the mainline branch. Some people may not want all the new features, and they just want a stable branch that just gets critical issues and security vulnerabilities patched as soon as possible. And for those users, we have the stable branch. Among the 2 branches, as you can see on the slide, we typically recommend people to use the mainline branch, not just because it gets the new features much more quickly, but also because that's the one that we actively test. So in our test beds that we're running in our Q environments, we're testing out the mainline build. Our NGINX Plus builds are also based off the mainline branch. So this is the branch that gets the most eyes on it. And so that's what we typically recommend people to use. The downside with using builds from your OS vendor is that they're not always updated very frequently, so critical issues and security vulnerabilities may take a while to trickle down from our repo down to the OS vendor. Somewhat extreme example, Debian Jessie has NGINX 1.6.2, which is fairly old. We're up to 1.13.x, I believe 6 at the time of this recording now. So it's a fairly old build. So it is typically recommended to use our official branch to make sure you get the latest code. And some key files once you install, so then what? There's the etc nginx directory, and that's where all the nginx configuration is stored. So it's a directory you're going to be spending a lot of time in if you're going to be playing with nginx. There's the main nginx.conf file, and that's the top-level nginx configuration. And it has some global configuration, global parameters that are set. For most use cases, you don't need to modify this file. There are some modifications you can do to it. And if you go through our webinars, there's a webinar called Basics and Best Practices, where we go through what changes you might need to make to nginx.conf. But for the most part, you don't need to touch this file. Where your actual configuration is going to go is in the conf.d folder. And in older versions of NGINX, we had a sites available folder or sites enabled folder. And if you install from Ubuntu or Debian, you're likely to see those directories. And you could put the configuration in there as well, but we typically recommend people put it in the conf.d folder. That's what we typically recommend, and that's how we configure it ourselves. So within the conf.d folder, you just name the file after the name of the site. So if your name of your site is www.example.com, you just name it www.example.com.conf, and within that file, that's where you put your configuration. So that's where you put your server block, you put the host name, you put in the load balancing parameters, and everything else about that site that you want NGINX to handle, you would put into that file. And you would create a similar file for every single site that you're hosting within NGINX. So each site that you're hosting is going to be in a separate file, which gives it very nice, clean separation. And when it comes to debugging and troubleshooting, we provide two main logs. There's the access log that's on by default that provides details about all requests and responses. So if a request comes in, that's going to be logged in the access log along with the response. If it's a 400 response, 403 response, 200 OK, whatever it is, it's going to be logged in the access log. The other place to look is the error log, and that is just about errors if the configuration is not proper. If there's some other error that's encountered, for example, NGINX doesn't have the permissions to access a file that it's supposed to be accessing, that's going to be logged in the error log. So those are the two places to look if you're having errors. And a lot of problems will be resolved just by looking at that. Sometimes it's very clear as to what the actual problem is by looking at those log files. Okay, and with that being done, let's go ahead and jump into the Q&A.
Okay, great. I'm going to start by setting up reading out questions, and I'll give an initial answer, and then Faisal, if there's something kind of broader or more general I can say to set the scene, and then Faisal will give the detailed technical answer. So the first question is how to set up a VPN with NGINX in front, or a firewall path to VPN and then NGINX. So yes, NGINX is very, very commonly implemented as a reverse proxy server in front of your website. In fact, it's one of the best recommended ways to save a failing or flailing website. Apache tends to get overloaded and use increasing amounts of memory as it gets increasing connections, slowing down and eventually just stopping. And by putting NGINX in front, you can handle the traffic off of NGINX and then feed it back to the application server. If there's too much traffic for the application server, things slow down but don't die, and you can then add multiple application servers and load balancing. So this is a very relevant question. I'm going to repeat the question and then pass it to Faisal for a detailed answer. How to set up a VPN with NGINX in front, or do a firewall path to the VPN and then to NGINX?
Oh, so a good question. So NGINX itself doesn't have any VPN capabilities. So if you want to use a VPN, you would just put NGINX, typically inside of your VPN. If there's an internal service that you're using NGINX to reverse proxy, you'd put it inside your VPN. You'd use something like OpenVPN or one of the commercial solutions that's out there. You can also put NGINX outside your VPN if it's something external facing. But yeah, NGINX itself doesn't do VPN capabilities.
Okay, great. And a somewhat related question from the same person. How do you implement a port knocking strategy in NGINX? And for those of you who might not know what that is, which could be quite a few of you, port knocking is, according to Wikipedia, a method of externally opening ports on a firewall by generating a connection attempt on a set of pre-specified closed ports. So basically the ports are closed and then you knock on the door of them by generating connection attempts on them. And so I'm going to ask Faisal if there are any specific NGINX-specific things to know about implementing that strategy.
Okay, cool. Interesting question. I haven't heard port knocking in a number of years. And NGINX is typically a receiver of connection. So it functions as a reverse proxy, so clients connect to it. It typically doesn't make connections out, so it's going to be tough to use NGINX to do the port knocking itself. So if you want to do port knocking, and I'm not sure how people accomplish this today, but you have to have some other client application that does that for you, and that client can, of course, connect to NGINX. But NGINX itself can't do the port knocking for you, at least not easily.
And just to answer a basic question, will the session be recorded, and if so, where can we review the presentation? So the presentation is being recorded, and you'll be sent both the slides and the actual recorded presentation within a day or so of this. And we should have mentioned that earlier. So don't worry if you're not catching everything as it goes by, or you want to share with colleagues, you'll be getting this in the near future. So it seems that there's a follow-up question here. Let me bring it up. Oh, okay. Here's a good detailed question. And actually, okay, so let me read the question and then give a partial answer. Can you explain more about how NGINX internal server errors 500 and 499 differ? How should I procedurally go about debugging NGINX 499 errors in my web server logs? So I'm just going to mention something semi-related, which is that Amplify is a great tool for keeping track of things like different kinds of errors that get generated as you hit your server, managing them, setting alerts against them, checking your configuration to see if you have misconfigured things so that you're more likely to generate errors, and so on. So Amplify is a great tool for starting on questions like this and seeing where you're standing. But let me then repeat the question and turn it over to Faisal for a specific answer. Can you explain more about how NGINX 500 internal server errors and 499 errors differ? How should I procedurally go about debugging NGINX 499 errors in my web server logs?
Sure, great questions. A 500 error typically means something that's wrong with the backend application server. It's in a malformed response, something like that. So if you do get a 500 error, I'd go ahead and investigate your backend application server or something with NGINX not being able to communicate with it. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the 499 error, so I can't provide a great response there. But let's just go and look at the access log, see what information that provides, and we just did a quick web search. 499 and NGINX means that the client closed the connection before the server answered the request. Okay, so that means that can mean that the client closed the web browser in the middle of the session, and the server is in the middle of answering the request, and now NGINX has a request. The client's disappeared, so what do we do with the request? And that's the 499 error. So this might just be normal. You might just see a bunch of 499 errors just because people close off the connection, close off the client in the middle of a transaction, and that's when you see a 499 error.
Okay, good. Keep those questions coming. We're getting some really good ones. Thanks very much to all of you who are online and sending in questions in particular. So here's a question. I'm not sure what the answer is. The question is it possible to multiplex multiple domains onto a single IP and port pair? And I'll add the question, when might you want to consider doing that? The obvious thing that occurs to me is that you're too cheap to put your domains on different IP port pairs, but if you're running a bunch of low-volume websites, that might be a sensible approach. So let me pass that over to Faisal. Is it possible to multiplex multiple domains on a single IP and port pair?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. That's possible, and you would accomplish that using the server name directive. So you would create a separate virtual server for each site that you're hosting, and then each virtual server would have the server name directive along with the name of the server. So it'd be server name www.example.com, server name www.example2.com, and so on for each site that you're hosting. And then NGINX, if it receives a request on a particular IP port pair, it'll investigate down and look at the host header and use that to determine what virtual server should handle a request. So that is accomplished using the server name directive.
So let me just extend the question a little bit, Faisal, and ask when are times that you would want to do that? When would it make sense, and when would it not make sense to try to do that?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, you only have one IP address. That's all that's been assigned to you. And so you just want to use that single IP port pair to host multiple sites would be the main way to do it. If you have multiple IPs, that would help it allow you to have more, I guess, freedom or separation between the sites. So you can definitely separate it out by IP port. IP space is dwindling, right? And so getting multiple IPs is not as easy as it once was. So that's a very common occurrence.
Okay, cool. We have a completely unrelated and also quite valuable question. How does dynamic modules functionality work in NGINX? So basically, dynamic modules are modules that a standard module is compiled into NGINX. So it then becomes part of the code that runs when you run NGINX. So a dynamic module is loaded into NGINX at runtime based on configuration files. This does a few things. It gives you independence, between the module code and the base NGINX code. With NGINX Plus, it gives you a lot more flexibility to use different modules while using the pre-compiled version of NGINX, which is how NGINX Plus is delivered. So that is a very big picture explanation. Let me ask Faisal to both answer the same question, how dynamic modules functionality works, and then anything to add about whether static modules are still a better idea some of the time, or should you just do everything new as a dynamic module? So Faisal, how does dynamic modules functionality work?
Sure, and that's a great question. So dynamic modules is something that we just introduced fairly recently, within the past year and a half, I believe. And before we introduced this functionality, you could only compile in static modules. So if you wanted to use a module with NGINX that wasn't part of our build, you'd have to compile from source. So using dynamic modules enables you to use our builds and additionally load in a third-party module without having to recompile NGINX from source. So it gives you some excuse me, some additional value there. It works in, just as you would expect it with any sort of dynamic software module functionality. There's the module that you download, or you compile the module itself from source, and then there's a directive in NGINX called load_module. So you'd use the load module directive, the name of the module, and then the module itself is loaded into memory when you restart NGINX or reload the process. And from there, then you would just use the module-specific configuration, whatever that is. For example, we have an image filter module, and you could use the directives from the image filter module to resize images and manipulate images and do things like that. So that's very high level of how it works.
Okay, cool. Now I attempted to send to all of you 2 links, but let me, in case you didn't get that, tell you what the 2 blog posts that I linked you to are. The first blog post is how to compile dynamic modules for NGINX Plus, and you can just, if you look on the NGINX Plus site, compile dynamic modules. That should get you to it. And then for background, NGINX dynamic modules, how we implemented them. And so if you search for dynamic modules implemented on our site, that should get you to that blog post. And that's just some information about both why we did what we did and how you can take advantage of it, to go into some detail on what Faisal just shared. Okay, here's a good question. How does mod security integration with NGINX work? And I can take an initial shot at that, and then Faisal can talk more about the actual runtime implications and anything you need to do. So mod security is a very well known and very widely used WAF, Web Application Firewall, for various web servers. And mod security got huge usage, and we got an implementation onto NGINX. And the implementation we got is a little different from the traditional implementation, and in the long run is going to serve everyone a lot better. So mod security used to be one big piece of code that was written against whatever web server it worked with. And now, going forward, mod security is written as a core that handles security functions in a web server independent fashion, and a smaller piece of code that ties that to a specific web server, so that the core functionality, the security functionality, can be improved, and then the connection to different web servers can be improved separately. And we like that kind of thing. The fact that we are commonly implemented as a reverse proxy server. There's an old saying that you guys probably all know, there's no problem in computer science that can't be solved with another level of indirection. And so that's both part of how NGINX is used as a reverse proxy and what mod security has done in order to get more flexibility and power into its core security functionality, and then handle the messy details of integrating with specific web servers separately. So when you get the NGINX WAF, you're getting mod security, carefully implemented and tuned for NGINX Plus, but with the core functionality being the same across different web servers, which is exactly what you want, because then when you work in different implementations, you don't need to worry about using different rules or whether they're up to date the same way and so on. So that's Mod Security 3.0. Now, Mod Security 3.0 does have some directives from previous versions of Mod Security that it doesn't support. So there are details available for that through Mod Security and through us. And Mod Security, the NGINX WAF works with NGINX Plus. So when you use that, you'll want to use NGINX support first line, and then we bring Mod Security in to help on questions that they're particularly expert in. So now let me ask the same question of Faisal. How does Mod Security integration with NGINX work?
Thanks, Floyd. And I'll just add one or two things there. First, a little bit on the history that Mod Security has had integration with NGINX for some time, but it hasn't worked very well. Specifically, the performance was not very good. So the new Mod Security 3.0 is a complete rewrite of the Mod Security core, and it's been split into two parts. So now there's something called Live Mod Security, and that's like the core Mod Security functionality. And there's a separate connector piece, and there's different connectors, and there's an NGINX connector, which is most relevant to us, and there's an Apache connector, and I believe they're working on an IIS connector as well. So Mod Security has been split into two different concerns there. And so what that means in the end is now it is a native integration with NGINX, and so the performance is significantly better than previous attempts to port it over. And the way it loads into NGINX is as a dynamic module. And with NGINX open source, what you'd have to do is you'd compile Mod Security from source. You don't have to compile NGINX. So you just use our NGINX builds, and then you compile Mod Security from source. And we have instructions on our blog how to do that. If you just search Mod Security, you'll find it fairly easily. And then you just load it in as a dynamic module. And for NGINX Plus customers, we pre-compile it for you. So you don't have to compile it from source. The NGINX Plus customers will then just install the pre-built dynamic module. It's an additional cost, of course, for NGINX Plus customers, but it is available to you to install.
Okay. Here's a question about Docker. And the question is, so many people get NGINX from Docker. And the question is the official Docker image updated in line with the mainline release? And just to expand on that question, the question is the version of NGINX that's available through Docker, is that updated in line with the mainline release, or is there some kind of delay or difference? And so I'm just going to hand that question straight over to Faisal. Is the official NGINX image available through Docker updated in line with the mainline release?
It absolutely is. It might trail by a day or so. I don't follow it that closely, but it is kept fairly up to date with our mainline branch. And I believe we also have a build or a Docker image that's built off our stable branch as well. So you can kind of choose either. We also have an Alpine version. We also have a Debian version. So there's different versions of it as well. So so we have a pretty robust set of Docker images that you can choose from, and they are actively maintained.
So here's an interesting question. When storing server config files in conf.d, is there any facility like sitestash enabled to stage files before activation? So I'm going to turn that one over to Faisal and see. Oh, now, we did get a question a few minutes ago that was more like a support question than a question that we can answer in this venue. So if you do have support type questions, please check the support option on the NGINX website. There's community support for open source and paid professional support for NGINX Plus. But again, the question is, when storing server conf files in conf.d, is there any facility like sitestash enabled to stage files before activation?
A good question, and I don't believe so. I'm not too familiar with how sites enabled worked, but if you do want to stage it, I would just recommend using a separate staging server or using a development environment, testing it out there before moving it out to a production environment, just following that standard workflow. So that's how I'd go about it.
Okay. Okay, cool. Now this is a general topic that we like to talk about. We'll see about the answer to the specific question. So Let's Encrypt is more and more widely used. These are SSL certificates that are available for no cost. And they're particularly suitable in a microservices environment where you might be spinning service instances up and down on an ongoing basis. And of course, you don't want to be paying for a new certificate every time an instance decides to die and then needs to be reborn or an additional instance started up. So here's the specific question. How do I install and automatically renew Let's Encrypt SSL certificates for multiple virtual servers in NGINX? Is there any support in the Let's Encrypt client or in NGINX? So I will pass that question on to Faisal, again, about installing and automatically renewing the certificates for multiple virtual servers, either through the Let's Encrypt client or through NGINX.
Cool, another great question. And yeah, we love Let's Encrypt over here. And it is supported now officially in CertPot. That's the Let's Encrypt client. That support was added fairly recently. It was in beta before that, but it was finally lifted out of beta just within the past few months. And so if you go to our blog, just nginx.com/blog, or if you just even go to the main site and you just search Let's Encrypt, you'll see that we have two separate blog posts on Let's Encrypt integration with NGINX. One was written roughly 2 years ago that I wrote myself, and that was before NGINX was officially supported within CertPot. And those instructions still work, though they are slightly more complex because CertBot kind of automates a lot of the stuff that's in that blog. And we just recently, within the past maybe month and a half or so, published an updated blog that does take into effect the support within the Let's Encrypt client within CertBot. And that's the one that we recommend that you use now because it's just easier to configure. If you go on that blog post, it has all the full details of how you set that up, how you get the cert, and also how you set up the auto renew. And you typically just do that with a cron. So you set up a cron to run every month or every 2 months, and that'll go through and renew the certificate for you and restart NGINX. So it's all within that blog post.
So I'm going to take a moment and copy and paste that answer hopefully to all of you. So let's see if that gets you. Okay, I hope that gets all of you on the call. Is NGINX backward compatible, and if so, up to which version? So that's a great question, and I'll have Faisal answer in detail. However, we encourage everyone to keep everything as up-to-date as possible because there are so many security challenges out there taking advantage of weaknesses in any kind of software. We're constantly updating. The NGINX software developers are in ongoing touch with the people who track web security at the core, really, of the internet. So we're working on things, most of which we talk about, but a lot of them are small details that just are too much to communicate. And that's true not only of NGINX, of course, but of everyone who provides core software for the internet and the web. So NGINX does maintain strong backward compatibility over multiple versions, and let me let Faisal tackle the question of how much and how far back.
Sure. So I'm not entirely sure actually what they mean by backwards compatibility because there's different types of backwards compatibility. So I'll just give a few thoughts on that from what I find. And if you have a configuration from an older version of NGINX and you update to a newer version, that config should still work. If you have, for example, a config from a newer version of NGINX and you try to use that with an older version of NGINX, that may not work, right? Because there's new directives that we've introduced, newer versions that are not older versions. In general, NGINX, by default, the way the default configuration is designed for maximum compatibility. So, for example, if NGINX connects to one of your upstream servers, a server that it's proxying for, it'll use HTTP 1.0 by default, just because that will give you the maximum compatibility. So I don't think backward compatibility is a concern with NGINX. It should work fine. I don't think you'll run into any issues with that. But aside from that, I don't know the specifics of what you're trying to get to with that question.
here's a great question and something that we love to talk about. I'm currently evaluating load balancers. I really have no expertise in this, so I'm wondering if you have a clear TechNote example on how to install and configure NGINX to be used as a load balancer. So the short answer is yes. Both our documentation for NGINX open source, for NGINX Plus, and our blog as well have quite a bit of information about this. And there is also information on various sites out there on the web. Of course, you know, we can't own how up-to-date that information is or how accurate. But basically, using NGINX as a load balancer is a very, very, very widely used use case and well-known and well-supported at the community level and, of course, for NGINX Plus. A couple of comments that I can quickly make and then see what Faisal might have to add is that there are hardware load balancers out there from Citrix and F5 and so on, and people are used to using those, and they've proven reliable, and they're often used in production for, you know, very important deployments. But when people are either growing their deployment, doing new apps alongside those, or looking at the cost-benefit and operational considerations for their current hardware load balancer setup, in all of those cases, there are real advantages to moving to software load balancing. So we have an ebook about this, we have blog posts about it. Basically, it's much cheaper and much more flexible. It's so much more flexible that people might be willing to pay more than they currently pay in order to get the flexibility, but they actually pay less. And so this is NGINX running on industry standard compatible servers that are easily available from a bunch of vendors, which gives you flexibility and affordability. And then the way NGINX software works gives you great options in terms of configurability and ease of management. And, you know, depending on how your site is set up, not having to bother the networking guys in order to get routine changes in how load balancing is working for a given application. Anything else I can add? We have comparisons to F5 and Citrix on a price performance basis. Even if you're not currently using those, it's worth looking at that to get, you know, start getting buzzword compatible with how people talk about load balancing and what some of the considerations that people have as they evaluate load balancers, as you say here. I will finally add that one of the main differences between NGINX open source and NGINX Plus is that NGINX Plus has two things that you might value. The first is additional load balancing options, along with monitoring options, which are great in a load balancing use case. And then NGINX Amplify actually gives you additional information if you're running NGINX Plus. The other thing that might be very valuable to you is that NGINX Plus includes support. And given, you know, you're doing load balancing because you have a busy website, right? So there's a lot of time and effort going into it. So the cost of NGINX Plus is really pretty small compared to the time and other investments that you're making in your site. So really sincerely good luck with the implementation. There's a lot of great information out there. NGINX and NGINX Plus are definitely things that you should look at for this, and we can highly recommend. And let me turn over to Faisal for any specifics that he cares to add.
Thanks, Floyd. I'll just add that we did a webinar not too long ago, both myself and Floyd, just on the subject, how to use NGINX as a load balancer. So I'd recommend you to go watch that. Just go to nginx.com/webinars. It's called High Performance Load Balancing, so that'll answer a lot of your questions. Just to give you a quick overview, you install NGINX just as you would install it in any other use case, and I recommend to use our repo. So you just add our repo and just apt-get install NGINX or yum install NGINX, depending on if you're a Red Hat or Debian side of the fence. And from there, the concepts are the same as it would be in a hardware load balancer. So you configure a virtual server, and the way you do that is using the server directive. And then within that, you would put in all your virtual server configuration. And we have the concept of pools, and that's through the upstream directive. So you use the upstream directive, and you define all your backend servers or your pool. And then you link the virtual server to the pool using the proxy pass directive. So those are the main three directives that you would use within a load balancing use case. But yeah, I would recommend to watch that webinar that we did fairly recently. That'll really go into details about it.
Okay, great. I'm glad we were able to address that one real thoroughly, because it's such an important question relating to NGINX and Plus. So here's a question about NGINX Unit. we showed NGINX Unit briefly in the slides that we had about the NGINX application platform, and the NGINX Unit, still in beta, was released as in beta form at our conference in early September, and we discussed and demoed it there. So all sorts of information and live demos on our YouTube channel, and transcription blog posts in our blog, and information on our website, and on GitHub you can download it, and people are talking about it. The release information was big on Hacker News when it happened, so we're having a great time with Unit. And Unit originally, and in its current form, supports PHP, Python, and Golang. That's Go, the language that Facebook has released for us, which is a specialized version of PHP designed for scalability and performance, I think, are the main features. So we've announced that NGINX Unit's next languages that it will support, when we expand the number of languages available, Java will be right there, as well as JavaScript, Node.js. So the question here is, when will NGINX Unit support Java? And the short answer is, we haven't said yet, but as soon as possible. We may take Unit to commercial release, to general availability with the current set of supported languages, and then add Java. I'm not sure, but that may be the more likely approach. What Java version will it support? I can only say that that'll be evaluated as the implementation is being done, but that on other languages, we've supported the most recent couple versions, is what I've seen. If there's a radical discontinuity to us, right, because the world looks different to us than it does to a developer, if there's a radical discontinuity to us between Java versions, we would only support the most recent one, or back to wherever that discontinuity was. And will it serve standard WAR files? I don't know that world, but I'd be shocked if we don't do anything that you would reasonably expect, an application server to do for you. And I should have mentioned, Unit is an application server, works well in an NGINX Plus environment. And we're not recommending it for production use at this point, because it is truly only a beta, and production is production. It's really important that things work there. So let me see if we have additional comments from Faisal. And the question is, when will NGINX Unit support Java? What Java version will it support? And will it serve standard WAR files?
And thanks, Floyd. So the question of when, and that's, it's hard to say, because that is, it's a planned item, so it's hard to commit to it. But I believe it's going to be Q1 of next year, so let's just say tentatively Q1 2018. But please don't hold me to that. And as for versions and stuff, Unit will use whatever version that you have installed. That's how it works with PHP. So whatever version of PHP that you have installed on your system, it uses that. So if you have PHP that you've compiled from source, for example, then it's going to use that. If you installed it from a repository, it's going to use that. And it's going to function the same with Java. So wherever you installed the JVM from, if it's V8 or whatever it may be, it's just going to use whatever JVM you have on your system. That's how it's going to work.
All right, thank you. And here's a good question that will turn out to be related. Hi, can you comment on using NGINX plus PHP FPM for running web apps written in PHP? And do you think that this is the best choice, or can we suggest a better option? So first of all, this is very widely used. So NGINX plus PHP FPM is a battle-tested solution that's used all over the place. And you probably already know that WordPress, for instance, is a PHP-based framework. And there are, of course, many others out there. So all of those things are run off NGINX plus PHP FPM. And then can we suggest a better option? Not at this time, but as we were just describing, Unit supports PHP in its current beta version. So when Unit goes to general availability, when Unit goes to general availability, you'll have the option of running NGINX in front and then Unit behind it as your application server supporting your app. And you would have to evaluate that at the time, of course, because with Unit being in beta, we can't really characterize the performance footprint flexibility and other concerns that you would have in wanting to do this. So that's a possible future option, but definitely for the near term foreseeable future for a production release, you'll want to start with NGINX and PHP FPM, and then evaluate unit as it comes into general availability. And now let me ask Faisal to elaborate.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what Floyd said there. NGINX plus PHP FPM is your best bet, so that's what you want to use now. Keep an eye out for unit, and when that matures and stabilizes, that may be the best bet. But PHP FPM, super lightweight, tons of resources out there, tons of resources on using NGINX plus PHP FPM. So that's definitely what you want to go with.
And one more unit question before we go back to some more specific NGINX questions. NGINX OSS and plus questions. How is NGINX Unit different from a standard fast CGI type application server setup? Basically, Unit is able to run multiple chunks of code at the same time, and those can be from any of the languages that Unit supports, and can be from different versions of languages running on the same server. Otherwise, in character, so it's simpler in that it's more capable in that sense, and it's somewhat simpler because Unit combines different kinds of functionality into one piece of software. However, you're going to be wanting to know things about performance and reliability and footprint and so on, and we can't characterize those yet until we get to general availability. So that's the broad answer. Let me see if Faisal has anything to add to it.
Yeah, great response, Floyd. And I'll just reiterate some of the points Floyd made, that it does differ in that it runs multiple languages, so it has fairly interesting architecture about it. But it functions in a similar way as you'd expect, right? It takes in client requests, it goes and spins off a process with your PHP codenet, runs the PHP code, and then returns the request to the user. So at a very high level, it functions in a similar manner. Where it differs, though, is that it does support multiple languages, and it's configured very differently. It's not a configuration file as FPM or pretty much all the other app servers out there. It's configured by a REST API, which makes it very useful for automation or dynamic scaling use cases.
Great, thank you. And we have a question here. How do I get a quote directly from you or from a reseller? So we suggest that you contact your sales teams. There may be cases where our sales team will recommend that you work through or with a reseller as well as us. But I actually am sending to everyone the answer to that. All over the NGINX website, nginx.com, are links to contact sales. And I've sent the specific URL through as an answer to your question. So thank you very much for that question. We really appreciate it. Let's see. I'm going to, I can answer this one quickly. Do unit logs go into NGINX logs or a separate location? So they go into a separate location. Speaking of load balancing, is there any plan for NGINX to use the Docker API instead of leveraging console for dynamic Docker container discovery and routing? And let's see, we don't talk too much about future plans unless they're real close to being available for release, because sometimes we'll start work on a feature and then deprioritize it or do something else instead in a given release. But let me see if Faisal has any visibility into this one. Is there any plan for NGINX to use the Docker API instead of leveraging console for dynamic Docker container discovery and routing?
Good question. So within NGINX Plus, we have a feature that does DNS service discovery. So it'll use the DNS interface of the Docker built-in service discovery mechanism and learn about services that way. And it's fairly easy to accomplish. You just use the Docker DNS IP, and it's always at a fixed location. So that's how you do it. For NGINX open source, we don't provide that feature, so you'd have to use console, which I think works pretty decently well. And that will go and, using templates, will rewrite the configuration, restart NGINX. So if there's a way you can get that templating system working with Docker. It should work fine. I just don't have a reference architecture for it. But yeah, so the ways we'd recommend is NGINX Plus can use a DNS interface with the Docker service discovery, and NGINX open source, you would definitely just use console. If you want to create another integration with Docker that rewrites NGINX configuration, you can certainly try to do that.
All right. We have two different HTTP2 questions from two different people that came in at the same time, which is really interesting. So let me bring up both of them. First of all, does NGINX support the new HTTP2 standard? And do you need to do any special configuration to enable that support? So then the additional question is, does NGINX as a reverse proxy cache support the HTTP2 push feature, and then some specifics about that? So let me give initial answers of the questions, and then let Faisal go into detail. So yes, we definitely support the new HTTP2 standard. We also supported the Speedy standard that came before that, and NGINX is usually the first and most widely used web server for these kinds of features, and it was for both Speedy and HTTP2. We were early implementers. We took people through beta releases of our HTTP2 support, and now it's just part of the system. Do you need to do any special configuration to enable that support? Yes, you need to put HTTP2 into a server block, and I'll have Faisal talk about the specifics of that. Now, there is a more detailed answer on special configuration. We have blog posts that describe this in quite a bit of detail. Just look up HTTP2 on our website. But the way that you architect your app can be different for HTTP2 than for standard HTTP. And the funny thing is that there are all these tricks and workarounds that you use with HTTP to get decent performance over the limited number of connections you've got. And with HTTP2, you basically unravel all of that stuff. So you did all this extra work, and now you got to go through and get rid of it and hope you don't cause any bugs. So I'm sorry about that, but that is the answer, is that things are simpler with HTTP2 in general. And then, do we support HTTP2 push? We generally don't. And we hate to say things like that because we're proud of our software development team, and the company as a whole are very proud of the things we do support, especially features like this that are kind of on the cutting edge. However, we're seeing that HTTP2 is tough, push is tough to implement in a way that makes it really worth the hassle. So HTTP2 push means basically you send stuff down the wire based on the probability that the user will use it, even when you're not certain. So if everyone answers a yes to a yes/no question, and yes causes a given page to be served, then you can pre-download that page. And the 80% of the time people choose yes, then they get a very fast response. However, people are doing more and more with dynamic pages. So the chances that you know what you're going to want to push to someone, and there's usually more than two choices, and there's usually less than an 80-20 split in how often people choose them, and you're just filling the wire with stuff that may or may not get used and may or may not be up to date. So it turns out once you apply all those concerns, the number of times you want to be using push is limited. Of course, it's valuable in certain use cases. Anything like this would be, but we have not found it worth taking the time and effort to support this feature for the kinds of ways that people are using NGINX in real life. The push feature sounds great, and for a limited number of use cases, it is great, but there's a lot where it isn't. Let me ask Faisal. I'm gonna ask both questions again. So let me start by asking him: does NGINX support the new HTTP2 standard, and do you need to do special configuration to enable it?
Sure. So I think you did a great job answering that question, Floyd. I'll just add that the specific directive is the listen directive. And so you would do listen 443 SSL HTTP2. One thing to keep in mind with HTTP2, one is what Floyd mentioned, that a lot of the stuff that you did, the front-end optimization techniques are no longer necessary and actually considered anti-pattern, so you need to enroll all that. The second is that HTTP2, for the most part, only works over SSL, so you would need to redirect all HTTP traffic two SSLs. You'd have you have a server block listening on 80. It just have it redirect everything to the 443 site, the SSL site, and then that would be optimized by HTTP2. So that's the only other thing that you need to keep in mind.
And of course, you can use your free Let's Encrypt certificates with that SSL support. And then the more detailed question that followed is whether we support the push feature. And there were some specific questions like if so, and some more specifics. But since we don't, we're not going into that. So anything about HTTP2 push, Faisal?
Yeah, we don't support HTTP2 push at this time. The request does come in from you guys really every so often, and the response that we have, and I'm keep it a little high level on this one, is that it may not give you the performance boost that you think it will. It is limited, and it also is fairly complex to implement. So those two reasons are kind of what's holding us back from implementing it. If we do, find a use case where we'll, provide a significant performance benefit, then that's actually something we will negotiate, or not negotiate, we will consider. But at this time, we don't support it.
Okay, cool. A good general question here. The different principal strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities between NGINX and NGINX Plus. Let me mention a few of the high points and then have Faisal drill down where he wants to add some specifics. First of all, this comparison is on our website, but I think it's worth answering live as well. There are specific features in NGINX Plus around load balancing. There are additional load balancing options that make load balancing work more efficiently. There is the ability to put in a new configuration without a noticeable restart. So it has no effect on the user if you restart NGINX Plus. And then just the third out of the top three might be, and maybe probably number one for an awful lot of people, is that support is included with NGINX Plus. And NGINX Plus has award-winning support, and people are very happy with that. That kind of implies something that's an additional like B to support, which is having a relationship with NGINX, the company, where you can ask questions about what we're going to be doing and give your own input as to what you're looking for. Of course, we take those suggestions from the community as well, but we can have a different kind of relationship with our customers for Plus and work with them pretty closely on what we've got coming up and what they've got coming up. Some of the most fun we have at NGINX is detailed discussions with customers about whether a given feature should be supported in NGINX Plus or NGINX, or whether they should implement it in their application. A surprising number of times the customers end up agreeing that architecturally we're better off keeping NGINX and NGINX Plus more simple and somewhat pure rather than putting in specific features for narrow use cases, as we were just discussing with HTTP2. Let me ask Faisal, who knows this inside and out, to address the question as well. What are the different strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Floyd, and great question. And the way we differentiate NGINX and NGINX Plus is it's twofold. One is the support, and I think Floyd covered that quite nicely. That you get options of 8x5, 24/7 support, or even 24/7 support with a 30-minute SLA with NGINX Plus. So that's a huge benefit, just being able to have help. And then we have closed source features within NGINX Plus, and we covered one earlier in this webinar on DNS service discovery, in that we can pull the DNS interface of a service registry and pull in service information through that. So that feature is exclusive to NGINX Plus. I'm just going to rattle off some of the features on the load balancing side. We have active health checks and session persistence. So those are two features that we make into NGINX Plus. On the security side, we can authenticate JOT tokens, so that is useful for some API authentication use cases, and so that is in NGINX Plus exclusive feature On the caching side, we have a cache purging API, which, just as it said, makes it a lot easier to purge your cache content and much more fine-grained purging rather than just wiping out a whole directory as you would probably do with open source. With Plus, you can just use an API to clear out the cache. And yeah, there's a handful of other features there, and it's just kind of escaping my memory right now what those are. But if you just go to nginx.com/product/nginx and you scroll down, there's a compare versions button. So you click on that, and that'll give you the full bullet list of what's available. And I just want to highlight one more thing. It's the dynamic modules repository. So for NGINX Plus customers, a nice value add that we have is that we pre-compile a bunch of modules. Some are first-party modules, software modules, and some are third-party, and some are provided by partners. And there's a handful of these, about 20 or so modules that you can plug into NGINX Plus and get additional functionality. And it's super easy to do. So that's a nice value add that we have for our commercial customers as well.
Okay, we've reached the top of the hour, and we very much want to thank you guys for your questions. We're going to take a look at the questions that are currently up and see if we can just try brief answers to some of them. So if you already have a question in, we'll try to briefly address it. And we will do future sessions like this one. This one has been quite popular. We've had a lot of people online and a lot of great questions. So thank you all very much. And if you have a question next time, I promise we will go from the top down and answer any questions in the order they come in. So if you haven't had your question answered and we don't get to you responsibly, then please come back and get your question. You can get your question in advance of the webinar next time, as a couple people did today. All right, thank you very much from Faisal and I, and look forward to seeing you on future webinars.
Thank you again for joining us. Our previous webinars are available on demand on our website, nginx.com, in the resource section. So be sure to check those out. Have a great day.